morning's reading is taken from Luke chapter 19, verses 28 to 40. Jesus' triumphant entry. After telling this story, Jesus went on toward Jerusalem, walking ahead of his disciples. As he came to the towns of Bethphage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 disciples ahead. "Go into that village over there," he told them. "As you enter it, you will see a young donkey tied there that no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks, 'Why are you untying that colt?' just say, 'The Lord needs it.'" So they went and found the colt just as Jesus had said. And sure enough, as they were untying it, the owners asked them, "Why are you untying that colt?" And the disciples simply replied, "The Lord needs it." So they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their garments over it for him to ride on. As he rode along, the crowd spread out their garments on the road ahead of him. When he reached the place where the road started down the Mount of Olives, all of his followers began to shout and sing as they walked along, praising God for all the wonderful miracles they had seen. "Blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven." But some of the Pharisees among the crowd said, "Teacher, rebuke your followers for saying things like that." He replied, "If they kept quiet, the stones along the road would burst into cheers."
Good morning, my name's Wayne. I'm one of the ministers at Caution Baptist Church, and it is so good that you're with us today. Today is Palm Sunday, and today we start Jesus' final journey to the cross. And with that in mind, I want to share some resources with you that we've put together to help you as you journey this week towards Easter. Tomorrow through to Saturday, if you've signed up to receive emails, you'll receive an email every day, a short reflection each morning to help you think about an aspect of Jesus' journey this week and how that relates to your life today. So look out for that in your inbox tomorrow. We're also going to be putting together some short videos that we're going to put on our socials throughout the week, where people are speaking into the question, what does Easter mean to you? And so that's just a way to hear from each other, to inspire us, to challenge us, to encourage us, to show us something maybe new about Easter. So look out for those this coming week as well. Alongside those 2 things, there are some times when we can meet online. We've got our usual prayer times throughout the week, and they're appearing on the screen now as I speak. But Thursday's prayer time at 8 o'clock is going to be a reflective communion time together. So come prepared with some bread and some wine or some juice or a cracker or whatever it is that you've got to partake in communion together. And we're gonna share that. We're going to bring our tables and come around one table together virtually online, but we'll have communion together. That's at 8 o'clock on Thursday. And then on Good Friday at 10 in the morning, we're going to have a live reflection online or on Zoom, so you can gather together with other people, and we'll hear the story, hear the biblical account of Good Friday, and we'll pray into that, and we'll just have a time together online with God as we remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for all of us. The Zoom code, and then on Saturday, I nearly got ahead of myself, on Saturday at 9 o'clock, we've got a family prayer time as well. So an awful lot happening this week to help us engage with Easter, to engage with Jesus and to move forward with him and to hear from him in new and fresh ways. The Zoom code for all of those times that we're going to meet online together is 212 2021 121, and everyone is welcome. And then on Easter Sunday, our online service will be available at 10:30 a.m. on our YouTube channel or via our website, and there'll be some pre-service worship from 10:15. So this week, while we can't meet in person, there are many opportunities for us to remember and, yes, celebrate what Jesus went through for us. It's the heart of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And it's good that we can still remember and celebrate that, even though we can't meet together in person yet. One of my great childhood memories was a 2-week static caravan holiday somewhere in the UK during the summer. It was always the last week of July, first week of August. It was shut down fortnight, if that means anything to any of you watching. If it doesn't, don't worry. It was just 2 weeks in the summer when Dad wasn't working and the factory was closed. But we would always have a 2-week static caravan holiday. My mum always chose the holiday and where we went. My dad wasn't that interested. He said, I don't mind where we go, just what's right for you and the children. Just tell me where I'm going so I can plan the route. And this was in the days, many years before sat-navs or map apps on our phones where we could get directions at the click of a button. This was in the days where you had a map, you had a piece of paper, you had a pen, and you planned the route meticulously. Or what they used to do, they would write off, and someone like the AA or the RAC, and they would get a printed route would be directions would be sent to them a few weeks before our holiday. And so then a couple of days before, Mum and Dad would sit there with this printed route, and it had the directions from home to the holiday camp on the one side, and then when you wanted to come home, you just turned it over and the return route was on the other side. And so they would look at these directions along with a map, and they would mark it out and put little notes of things to look out for, and that's how we got to wherever it is that we were going. And I remember going on these journeys with my parents, and my sister and I would be in the back of the car, and my mum would be in the front passenger seat with this printed map, her handwritten notes and directions, and then a road map as well. And she would then just call out the directions to Dad, who was driving. And it often ended in some crosswords, as Dad would say that Mum wasn't clear enough, or she gave him the direction too late and so had to turn around and come back. Or Mum would say, well, it would be helpful if you were listening and not thinking you knew everywhere you were going. And it was what a happy way to start a 2-week holiday. But it was all good-natured and it was all fun. And my sister and I used to just sit in the back, and we would find that quite amusing. But I also remember is that while my sister and I, might have known the name of the holiday park that we were going to, Mum might have shown us a brochure, we might have known the name of the seaside town that we were going to be staying in, but we had no idea of the direction of the journey. We had no idea of where we were going. But that was okay. For we trusted Mum and Dad that they knew what they were doing. They were the ones that had studied the route. They were going to get us there safely, and it would all be okay. There was never a thought in our minds that we would never get to the holiday camp, and 2 weeks later we would just be disheveled in the back of a car driving around because we never ever got there. That was never in question. We didn't know where we were going, but we trusted them. And we always had a great holiday. And today, with directions on our phones at the click of our button, where we simply type in the postcode, type in the destination, and off we go, it seems strange to not know where we're going. And what I've realized in today's world is that I often set off on a journey not knowing where I'm going. I may have an inkling of the area that I'm going to, but in terms of the streets that I need to drive down, the roads, the turn-ins, all of this kind of stuff, I'm just trusting my phone. I'm just trusting that the app that I've used is the right app, and it's given me the right directions, and I can put in whether I want to avoid toll roads, avoid motorways, I want the quickest route, or the scenic route, or it even reconfigures to take me away from traffic, and all of these things. And so I only know the full journey as I travel it. When I start, I don't know what it's going to look like. And it's only as I move along does that unfold before me. And there are moments where I only know the next instruction. I don't know what's coming after that. And while I'm okay with that when it comes to directions, I wonder, do I live my life with Jesus like this? And by this I mean, am I okay not knowing the next step and waiting until he has revealed it to me? Or do I try to figure everything out? Do I spend time meticulously with pen and paper trying to work out what is God saying to me? What's going to be the next step after I've taken this one? And do I plan and control everything in my life? Or am I willing simply to trust him and go where and when he says, even if I don't fully know what that is? Maybe you can relate to the car journeys that I've spoken about when I was younger, before maps on phones where you meticulously planned your route. Maybe you can relate to being a child sat in the back seat, not knowing where you were going or how long it was going to take you, but that was all part of the great adventure. Maybe you go on journeys and you simply type where you want to go into your phone and you follow the next instruction without a second thought. But have you ever gone on a journey and the directions just don't make any sense? What do you do then? Do you follow them, or do you try to think that you know better than the phone app or the sat nav, and you try to fool it and you try to go a different way? Or are you somebody that will always follow what it says before you, even when it doesn't make perfect sense? Maybe you have to follow it because you've got yourself in a situation where you really don't know where you are, and you really don't know where you're going. So you just have to keep following, believing that the direction on your phone's app knows better than you do. And we've got used to this, haven't we, with how we travel. But in other areas of life, we struggle with only having some of the information. And the reason we struggle is because in our modern world, with the advances in technology and science and even, what we think of how we've developed as human beings, we want to know everything. And when we don't know everything, we get a little bit antsy, we get a little bit panicky. We really don't like that. We don't like being drip-fed information. We want to know it all. We say, give me all the information and then I'll be able to decide. Now, obviously, there are many times in life when that's a good thing. But journeying through life is not always that straightforward. There are many who want absolute clarity in life, but there comes a moment when you just have to trust other people. You have to trust expertise of other things. You have to trust that other people, and with their experience and their knowledge, that they know best. In the same way that we often have to trust our maps on our phones and that it knows where it's going to take us. On those car journeys in the summers of the 1970s and early 80s, I did not have absolute clarity on where we were going, but I had confidence in my parents, and I trusted that they knew what they were doing and had reasons why they did what they did. And I say all of this today because when it comes to our walk with Jesus, we can get stuck on doing what he asks of us because we want to know everything even before he's revealed everything. And you see, here's the thing. Following Jesus does not mean absolute clarity, but it does mean absolute obedience. And today on this Palm Sunday, and I'm sure you think, oh, at last he's got to Palm Sunday. I know it's Palm Sunday. Don't worry, we're getting there. And today on this Palm Sunday, we're going to be thinking about this, and we're going to continue our series title of A Road Less Travelled into today and next Sunday, which is Easter Sunday. And you see, I think there is a danger of us wanting absolute clarity before we will move with God. And in doing so, we fail to travel along any road with him. This morning, the clocks went forward and we all lost an hour. It's a strange phrase, isn't it? We lost an hour. There's one comedian that says, this is the bad one. You know, the good one is the one in October, in the autumn, when the clocks go back and we gain an hour. But this one in March, when the clocks, when we spring forward in spring, we lose the hour, and this is the bad one. This is the one that nobody wants. But can you imagine refusing to alter your clocks because you did not have absolute clarity on why they changed the clocks twice a year? You know, for 6 months of every year, you would be completely out of sync with the rest of the world, wouldn't you? You would be late or early for an appointment. You would catch the wrong train. You would either arrive late or early to work and leave late or early. You would book a table at a restaurant when we're allowed to do that, that is, for say 7 o'clock. But if you would put your clocks, if you hadn't changed your clocks, you would turn up and your table would have been given to somebody else because you'd be an hour late. Or you know, imagine going to a wedding and you're the only one who follows your clock. You don't change it at all. You're going to turn up you could turn up at the wedding and it's already happened and you've completely missed it. You know, imagine if you were the bride or the groom and you did this, but your partner didn't. You would turn up and you may not be able to get married. If you chose to not change your clocks because you did not have absolute clarity on why this happened, your life would be a complete and utter mess. Now, before I go on, let me, just say, clarity is a good thing in many aspects of life. You know, there's nothing wrong with absolute clarity in things. But absolute clarity on what Jesus is doing is not required to follow him. But absolute obedience to him is. Let me say that again. Absolute clarity on what Jesus is doing is not required to follow him. But absolute obedience to him is. And we see this principle displayed in the events of that first Palm Sunday by some, but not by others. And while we heard the Palm Sunday account read from Luke's Gospel, I'm drawing on aspects from all 4 Gospels today. Throughout this account, you've got different people doing different things that they didn't really understand why they were doing them, but they did them anyway. The biggest group that do that are probably the disciples. You know, the disciples were totally confused about the whole going to a town and getting this colt thing. You know, you see, throughout Jesus's life, we see Jesus depicted in the Bible walking. We see him on boats. We never see him on a horse or a donkey until this moment, that is. So I wonder if the disciples were confused as to why he wanted any kind of animal to ride on. And then to deepen the confusion, why a donkey? Because if you're going to ride on anything, you choose a horse, right? A horse showed power, and it was how leaders showed everyone that they were a leader that was worth following. And then what was all this talk about going to a village and just untying the young donkey that somehow Jesus knew was going to be there? None of it made any sense at all. It was utter confusion for them. In John's account, he tells us that the disciples didn't understand at the time that all of this was a fulfillment of prophecy. You know, I love the fact that the disciples didn't get it. I love the fact that the disciples were totally confused about it. Why on earth are we going to get this donkey? What is this all about? And yet, they still did it. They still went along with it. They were totally confused about why they were seemingly walking into a village and stealing someone's donkey. Can you imagine the conversation as they walked? You know, what do we do if somebody stops us? What if they refuse to let us take it? No. You do the talking. You're better at that than I am. I'll just stand there and look pretty, and if need be, I'll look menacing so that we can get this donkey. But you do all the talking. All of that was probably being played out as they walked there. And then as Jesus rides on this donkey, the disciples are still baffled about what is going on. They didn't understand the prophecy from Zechariah. They just didn't get that all that was happening was what God had planned long ago. And this was a fulfillment of how God was rescuing all of humanity. It was part of the plan. And they were part of the action. And yet they didn't get it. Maybe they didn't understand that Jesus riding on a donkey was a symbol of peace, and Jesus was the Prince of Peace. But they may have had complete confusion, but they still had obedience. They may have not had absolute clarity, but they had absolute obedience and did what Jesus asked of them. In this account, we've got the owners of the donkey. We know nothing about them. We don't know if Jesus had arranged something with them beforehand, or if he had divine knowledge of this donkey being where it was going to be. It might have been possible that the owners knew of Jesus and his teaching, because loaning an animal for transportation to a respected rabbi was a thing that happened. However it happened, it's likely that the owners of the donkey were confused, because why does Jesus, even if they thought he's an amazing, respected rabbi, even if they believed who he was, why does Jesus need our young donkey? They would have not understood the full implication of what was happening. They did not have absolute clarity, but they still had absolute obedience, and they let their donkey go. They let the disciples take the donkey. And then there was the crowd, who lined the road and threw cloaks and palm branches on the ground. While they would have known that palm branches were symbols of victory, of triumph, of peace, of joy and eternal life, they probably didn't fully align that true meaning to Jesus. Especially some in the crowd, were asking, what's going on? Who is this guy on a donkey? And so the crowd were confused about who Jesus was. They wanted saving from Roman rule, from the government of the day. And so they wanted a leader, a strong leader who's going to lead them physically and give them freedom politically. And so a display of power for them would have been more fitting if Jesus had been, on a horse with an army behind him, just riding with shields and spears and swords and all of that kind of stuff. And yet they get this man plodding along on a donkey. That must have caused them confusion. But they had heard that Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. And so let's go and see what he's all about. And then they get caught up in what's going on, in all of the emotion. They didn't need absolute clarity, but some would allow their emotions to move them to absolute obedience. For there would be some that day who chose to follow Jesus. So all of these people in these groups didn't have absolute clarity about what's going on. And yet some of them, especially the disciples, they show absolute obedience. But then we get to the Pharisees. They also, like everyone else, didn't have clarity about what was going on. And that really freaked them out. While others allowed that to move them to obedience, for the Pharisees, no, don't like it, don't understand it. What are we going to do about this? They hated it. Here were a group of people, members of a society that had huge power and status and who enjoyed a large following of people. They saw themselves as the spokesman for the majority. They were strict about following legal traditions that, they weren't so much biblical, but rather we've always done it this way. This is what our forefathers did, and so we must do the same. And anyone who doesn't follow our 613 laws, our 613 commandments, they're going to feel the full force of us, because we are the Pharisees. And so these men see Jesus as a huge threat to their way of life, to their very existence. If people choose Jesus over them, then they cease to be relevant. They cease to be needed. They cease to have control. In the end, they cease to exist. This is why they tell Jesus to tell the crowd to be quiet, to stop it. You know, it was a frenzy. There were people going wild for Jesus, and they're seeing all of this, and they say to Jesus, "Can you tell all of these people to pipe down?" And Jesus, I can imagine Jesus laughing, say, "Are you crazy? You know, if I could even get them to quieten down, that would be one thing. But if I did that, even the stones that are lining the road, they're going to start cheering and shouting Hosanna. They're going to be the ones, you know, that are going to be bursting forth because nothing is going to keep it quiet." You know, Jesus is saying, "Look, sorry guys, people have had enough of your way of life for far too long, and I'm offering them not only another way of life, but the best, the true, the only way. For I'm offering them life itself. For, you know, they're going wild for me because for centuries people have been waiting for me, and now I'm here." And the Pharisees are confused about what's happening. They've lost control. Their clarity over what is happening is sketchy. And instead of seeing Jesus for who he is, this drives them to plot against him, and it just pushes them into further disobedience and away from God. You see, they didn't want God's control. They wanted control for themselves. No one other than Jesus had absolute clarity about what is happening on this day. And you know, a life with Jesus means it demands that we may not have absolute clarity, but we have to have absolute obedience. The disciples, the donkey owner, even people in the crowd did what Jesus asked them to do. Even though it didn't make sense in the moment, even though it caused confusion, there was obedience. And the obedience made a way for Jesus to do what God had asked him to do as well. Yet the only group that disobeyed were the Pharisees. So what does this say to you? Well, it says, don't be a Pharisee. You know, remember the quote that we've been saying all the way through, and I've said it so many times you must remember it. You know, following Jesus does not mean absolute clarity, but it does mean absolute obedience. You know, some of you are not going forward in your journey with Jesus because you're waiting for absolute clarity. Now, obviously, as I have alluded to, I have said, clarity is a good thing. You know, there are times in life when it's good to have absolute clarity. If you go and put petrol in a car, there are signs, aren't there? Please ensure you have the means to pay for your fuel before filling up, you know. And so if you've only got £30 on you or in your bank account, you don't put £50 worth of petrol in. You need to have clarity about what you've got. You know, I've sat in many exam rooms when I was younger, and I wished for absolute clarity over the answers to these questions on the exam sheet. And you know, there are things in life that are measurable. And when something is measurable, it's good to have clarity. But I wonder if outside of these measurable things in life, moments of absolute clarity are actually rare. And that's certainly true of faith. You know, at the start of Hebrews 11, we're about to hear of all the great heroes of faith like Moses and Abraham and so on and so forth. The writer says this: the fundamental fact of existence is that this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. The act of faith is what distinguished our ancestors, set them above the crowd. It's saying that our ancestors, these great heroes of faith, they did not have absolute clarity, but they had absolute obedience. They had absolute steadfast faith that they just had to do what God was calling them to do. Even though they didn't fully understand it, even though there were times when they were confused, they still had obedience. They still had faith. And isn't this great? This verse, it's saying that a life of faith is not about absolute clarity, but it's about absolute obedience. It says the only absolute is that we will not understand everything. We will not understand all that is happening. We will not be able to see the whole picture, the whole of our lives laid out before us. You know, there'll be times when you don't fully know what's happening or what to do. But having faith in God in those situations is what makes life worth living. You know, it says that absolute obedience, absolute faith, you know, that's what it means to have that handle on what we can't see. And when we live like that, it's exhilarating, it's the adventure. And that is what makes our life worth living. Having faith in God is the only true way to live. Obedience to God in the middle of confusion is what true life is all about. But as I said, some of you are not living this way. You may want a life that crosses all your T's and dots all your I's. Everything is perfectly laid out before you. You want a 5, a 10, a 20-year plan and of what you're going to do in your walk with Jesus, all neatly printed out, color-coded, put it laminated, put in a lovely ring binder that you can refer to. You put it off the shelf every now and again to make sure you're going in the right way. And you're stunted in your walk with Jesus because the ring binder doesn't work. You know, because something's happened or you there's no such thing as the ring binder. You can't have that kind of clarity in a faith, in a life with Jesus. And so because of that, you're stunted in your walk because you haven't got to that. But you think you're waiting for it. You're waiting, you're saying, I will move with Jesus. I will move with God. I will move in the power of the Spirit when I've got clarity, when I understand where this is going. And all that ends up happening is that you don't move. You don't go anywhere. You end up not walking forward. You end up not growing. You end up not trying because you're afraid to fail. You don't know if you should try. You see, you want absolute clarity, but that's not faith. What is it that the writer of Hebrews said? You know, it's a handle on what we can't see. And when we want to see everything, like the Pharisees did, that's not faith, it's control. For many of us, we've moved from being a child in the back seat of the car, not fully where we're going, but just loving the journey, loving the adventure, and just going with it. And we've moved into the driving seat, and we want to have control of every road that we travel down. Jesus is asking you to go to the next town and get a donkey, and you won't go until you know the time, the place, the names of the people you're getting it from, how much it will cost, what are the terms of the donkey hire agreement, and 101 other things. Now, I appreciate that may sound harsh, but we're called to have obedience even through confusion. And sometimes this only means knowing the next step. You know, you may have seen the picture by artist Charlie Maxey with the words, "I can't see a way through," said the boy. "Can you see a next step?" "Yes." "Just take that," said the horse. I love that. You know, absolute obedience means just taking the next step. And so on this Palm Sunday, as Jesus rides into Jerusalem, there was a lot of confusion going on. There was a lot that was unclear, but those who chose to take the next step took a step with Jesus, a step closer to seeing what came after the next step in front of them. You know, there's a lot of talk about how COVID has changed the world. There are many who have changed direction in their careers. Some have moved homes to new areas. Some have changed their attitude to life. Many have found a faith in God. Wanting absolute clarity says, when are we going back to normal? Absolute obedience says, how do I go forward into obedience of what God is laying before me now, even though I can't see it? Friends, don't compromise absolute obedience to Jesus for the chance of clarity and control over your life. You see, the Pharisees were confused and fearful, all because obedience meant losing control. Don't be a Pharisee, but instead be willing to have obedience even in the confusion. So as we draw this to a close, you know, today marks the start of the journey to the cross, a week leading up to Jesus' death and resurrection. Choosing absolute obedience over absolute clarity is a different way to live, but it's a faith-filled way to live. You know, we're all part of God's church, and over the next few months, buildings will start to open again after a year of being closed. It's an exciting time. What have we learned this last year? What needs to change? Were we too comfortable before the pandemic? Were we wanting to control everything? Did we know what we liked and we liked what we knew? And our actions and attitudes said, do not change that. Do we struggle to let go of things we've done for years because we place a greater emphasis on absolute clarity as opposed to absolute obedience? You know, this week, Jesus is about to go down the road less travelled. And he calls us to come with him. Going down this road means we let go of control and we let go of seeking absolute clarity and we simply obey because he is everything, and living this way makes life worth living. You know, look through church history and nothing great happened by following absolute clarity, but it did by following absolute obedience. Speak to anyone who goes on mission and absolute clarity is not strived for, but absolute obedience is. New churches that are planted are not born out of absolute clarity, how it's all going to work out. But they're born out of absolute obedience to doing something new, to taking the next step that God's laid before them. New ministries in church life that really reach out into the community, that can seem a little bit risky, are not established through absolute clarity about how everything is going to happen. But they're established through absolute obedience to doing something that seems a little bit beyond us, because that's faith. But you know, there's lots of other examples that we could say, but when we choose absolute obedience, then we allow God to do something far beyond us, and in doing so reach our communities. You know, are we only doing what we know we can do? Because that's the control, we've got clarity over those things. Let's be people who don't strive for that clarity, but we're willing to be completely, utterly obedient, even when we're confused. Because when we do that, then we see a move of God in our lives and in the lives of others. Then we see people lining the streets and cheering because they want this new way of life. And then we see communities changed. So let's be people of absolute obedience. Let's pray together. Father, thank you. Thank you that a life with you is amazing. Thank you that we don't need to know everything. We don't need to know where we're going. We just need to know you and to trust you. Father, may we be people this Easter who move from wanting absolute clarity, absolute control over everything, to being faith-filled, being willing to follow even when we can't fully see it. It's because we've got absolute obedience in you. And when we do that, wow, we'll be like kids sat in the back seat on an amazing adventure with Dad. May we do that. May we allow ourselves to journey with you that way this week. And this week, Father, speak to us, challenge us, encourage us, comfort us. May our love for you deepen as we see your love through us, through what your Son Jesus went through. And may we do all of that and live in your power. Bless you. Thank you, Father. Amen. Let's just worship God today as we close. We're going to sing. Meg's going to lead us. It's a bit old school. It's that song, When the Music Fades and all is stripped away and we just simply come. And you know, that's what obedience is. That's what faith is. Everything else might just be gone. We may be confused. We may not understand what's fully going on, but we simply come. We simply come to God and we worship him. Allow your hearts to be moved. Allow God to comfort, to just surround you, engulf you in his presence as we sing this, as we worship him today. Bless you, church.